In a desolate land untouched since 1881, a solitary man guards his secrets, haunted by the shadows of his past. The silence of his barren territory is ruptured when a mysterious woman, cradling a fragile baby, appears at the threshold of his isolation. Who is she? What truth does she carry in her arms? As their worlds collide, both are forced to confront the ghosts that linger between them. A story of loss, redemption, and the unyielding power of hope begins to unfold. Will this unexpected encounter shatter the silence forever? Dive into this emotional journey that will leave you breathless. Like and subscribe to unravel the mystery. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parched earth of the Wyoming plains. Dust swirled like lost spirits around the weathered homestead of Jacob Holloway, the last man to call this land home. He had not seen another soul cross his property since that fateful summer in 1881, when the world had been filled with laughter and the smell of fresh earth. Now, it was a desolate expanse, a silent testament to time's unyielding passage and the ghosts of dreams gone by. Jacob, a man marked by solitude, tended to his crops with a detachment, as if the very act of nurturing the land was an echo of a life he no longer lived. Each day, Jacob rose with the sun, his calloused hands brushing against the rough wood of his cabin, a structure that had seen better days, much like its owner. The tight lines etched on his face spoke of loss, years of wrestling with the land that had once promised bounty, but now offered only hardship. He moved with a methodical grace, each step deliberate, as if he feared disturbing the fragile peace that settled over the barren fields. The wind whispered through the tall grass, a soft murmur that barely broke the stillness, yet Jacob felt it keenly, as if it carried the weight of all he had lost. The family, the dreams, the laughter that once filled the air. In the distance, the faint outline of the mountains stood guard, their majestic peaks untouched by the passage of time. They loomed over Jacob's world, an ever-present reminder of his isolation. He had built these walls not just to protect himself from the storms of nature, but from the storms within. Each day blended into the next, a monochrome existence painted with shades of grey, where hope flickered like a dying ember in the hearth. Jacob's heart had grown accustomed to the silence, but beneath that silence, a relentless yearning pulsed, a desire for connection he could scarcely recognize. But then, on a day that began like any other, the stillness was shattered. A figure appeared on the horizon, moving with a sense of purpose that contrasted sharply with the soul-crushing routine of Jacob's life. At first, he thought his eyes deceived him. Perhaps it was merely a trick of the shimmering heat rising from the ground. But as the figure drew closer, the unmistakable outline of a woman became clear, her silhouette sharp against the vastness of the plains. In her arms, she cradled something small and fragile, wrapped tightly in a faded blanket, the colors muted by distance but undeniably vibrant against the bleak landscape. Jacob stood frozen, the hoe he had been wielding slipping from his grip and sinking into the dust. His heart raced, a tempest threatening to break the dam of his solitude. The woman's approach elicited a flurry of emotions he thought long dead: curiosity, fear, and a spark of something unfamiliar, something that whispered of possibility. Each step she took resonated in his chest, drawing him out from behind the barricades of his self-imposed exile, testing the limits of his isolation. As she drew closer, the woman paused, glancing up at the homestead, a fleeting moment of hesitation crossing her face. Jacob found himself standing on the threshold of his home, caught between the desire to retreat back into the familiar shadows and the pull of something impossible, a chance for a new beginning, however fragile it may seem. The world was shifting, and in that silence thick with anticipation, Jacob felt the weight of the years begin to shift alongside it. A child, a future. With that single encounter, the boundaries of his broken world trembled, and the choice he had dreaded most stood before him, like an open road leading into the unknown. The sun dipped lower, casting the world in hues of amber and crimson, and with it, the figure grew nearer, her footsteps breaking the symbiosis of solitude that encased Jacob's existence. As she approached, Jacob took in the details, the tattered edges of her dress flapping gently in the breeze, the way her hair, a dark cascade, caught the fading light. Each step she took seemed to send ripples through the fabric of the air, unsettling the dust that had settled like an unwelcome guest. Jacob felt the weight of the world tilt ever so slightly, as though she carried within her the power to disrupt the very foundations of his long-held isolation. The object she held close to her chest remained shrouded in the blanket, a delicate bundle swathed in muted colors, but it emitted a warmth that made Jacob's heart ache with both curiosity and fear. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to hope, yet here was a living embodiment of that feeling, fragile and demanding care. Silently, he scrutinized the woman's face, searching for signs of hardship mirrored in his own essence. Her gaze was focused but soft, filled with a tempered resolve that hinted at the stories that lay beneath the surface. Tales of struggle, survival, and perhaps the weight of decisions made in haste. The air between them vibrated with uncertainty, thick as the dust rising from the ground. Jacob's body betrayed him as he felt the urge to step forward, to invite her in, or perhaps to flee, to retreat into the shadows of his solitude, where no one could touch the aching remnants of his shattered dreams. But he remained rooted to the spot, as if the land itself conspired to keep him still. The heavy silence hung like a thick curtain, one that had long concealed the vulnerability he had so carefully guarded. Beneath that silence, however, a longing stirred, echoing the warmth of her approach. As she paused before the decrepit porch of his homestead, the evening light caught the contours of her face, illuminating the weariness etched into her features. Time had not been kind to either of them. Yet within that weariness, Jacob took note of a fleeting flicker of strength, a resilience born from a place he could only guess. He focused his gaze on her hands, gently swaying with the rhythm of a mother's love, cradling the mystery of the child she kept hidden, an unspoken bond that transcended the silence of the plains. The woman hesitated, her breath caught in her throat as she surveyed the desolation surrounding them. She seemed to sense the echoes of a life once vibrant, the laughter of children playing, families gathering, now lost to the yawning chasm of time. In that moment, time itself suspended, allowing Jacob a fleeting glimpse into what it meant to hope, to trust in the promise of human connection. The dusk began to deepen around them, shadows stretching and merging, enveloping both him and this stranger in a cloak of uncertainty. Yet against that backdrop of impending night, a sound emerged, soft and tentative, a whimper that punctured the stillness, pulling Jacob from his reverie. The baby stirred within the blanket, a tiny promise of life in the unforgiving expanse of the plains. Jacob found himself drawn toward the sound, but a lingering fear held him back. Years of isolation had numbed him, but this moment awakened something long dormant. He took a careful step forward, aching for a bridge to span the divide of their lonely worlds, a bridge made of their shared humanity, fragile yet filled with potential. As the breeze shifted, he held his breath and waited, feeling the weight of the woman's gaze upon him, a wordless invitation to step into the light. The air grew heavier with each passing moment, lingering thick with unspoken words and the weight of their shared solitude. Jacob stood there, heart pounding in his chest like a drum, the pull of her presence drawing him closer. He had spent years closing himself off, rebuilding the walls around his heart, but now those very walls trembled under the soft gaze of the woman before him. He could see the delicate outlines of wear on her face, etched by trails of hardship and worry, and yet an ember of determination flickered behind her eyes, igniting a longing deep within him that he had thought extinguished. The baby's whimper broke the tension, a soft sound that cut through the silence like the sharp crack of a branch in the stillness of the woods. It was a reminder of life, of the promise that still existed, hidden under layers of dust and despair. In that moment, the distance between them felt insurmountable yet tantalizingly close, a bridge of unspoken understanding forming in the desolate space. Jacob took a hesitant step forward. The sound of his boot crunching on the gravel broke the spell. He felt the ground shift beneath him, a resounding echo of the hope he had buried long ago, surfacing like a seed that, against all odds, dared to push through the barren soil. The woman looked down at the tiny bundle cradled in her arms, her fingers tightening around the edges of the worn blanket. Jacob watched as her brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of vulnerability passing over her features. He could feel the weight of her concern, the unyielding need to protect the fragile being she held against the harsh realities of the world. She didn't need to speak. Her gaze told him of the fear and desperation she carried, and in that shared silence, Jacob felt an unexpected tug in his chest, a desire to act, to reach out. With a deep breath, he closed the space between them, stopping just shy of the steps leading to his porch. The breeze danced around them, swirling the grains of dust that had settled over the years, and for the first time, Jacob sensed it, the warmth of human connection. His heart raced as he extended a hand, trembling slightly, unsure of how to bridge the chasm that had separated him from humanity for so long. You can come in," he offered, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the delicate moment. The woman lifted her eyes, a flicker of surprise darting across her face. She hesitated, the weight of his invitation hanging in the air like the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting soft gold across their figures. Jacob's heart sank momentarily, fearing she might turn away, a reflection of the rejection he had known all too well. But then, slowly, she moved towards him, her resolve hardening as she took that first step onto the worn boards of the porch. Each step was laden with the promise of possibility, and with every inch she gained, Jacob felt the boundaries of his isolation begin to dissolve. As she reached the top step, she offered a small smile, cautious but genuine, and Jacob's heart tightened. The woman shifted her grip on the blanket, revealing a glimpse of the baby's face, a delicate profile with eyes the shade of the sky just before a storm. In that moment, everything shifted, the weight of their shared burdens coalescing into something beautiful and fragile. Jacob realized he wasn't merely extending a hand to a stranger, he was offering a sanctuary for both her and the child, a chance to weave their stories together amidst the vast silence of the plains. As the sun sank behind the mountains, casting the world in hues of twilight, Jacob stepped aside, allowing her to enter the warmth of his life, a doorway to the possibility of healing, connection, and perhaps love. Jacob stood back, heart thundering in his chest, as he watched the woman ascend the porch steps. The world around him seemed to fade, the dry grass and eroded earth slipping into a hazy background as she crossed the threshold into his home. Her presence filled the space with a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a stark contrast to the cold isolation that had defined his days. Yet with that warmth came a flicker of tension. He was unaccustomed to sharing his sanctuary, and the weight of that reality bore down on him like the oppressive sun above. The woman stepped inside, her eyes scanning the dim interior of the cabin. Jacob caught her gaze lingering on the faded photographs lining the walls, remnants of a life once vibrant. Each image was a shadowed echo of laughter, of family gatherings now silenced by time. The air grew thick with unsaid words, a palpable reminder of the lives that had been intertwined within these walls. He felt exposed under her scrutiny, the layers of his solitude peeling back as she appraised the pieces of his existence, the very remnants of a life he had tried to bury. She shifted the bundle in her arms, and for a moment, Jacob's breath caught. The baby's face, framed by the tattered edges of the blanket, was a fragile thread tying them together in this unexpected encounter. The child stirred again, a soft coo breaking the silence, threading through the layers of uncertainty that hung between them. Jacob found himself instinctively stepping closer, compelled by the warmth of life that pulsed before him, yet hesitating as the specter of his own inadequacies rose to the surface. Could he nurture this tiny being? Could he be the man she needed him to be? In the stillness, Jacob noted the way the woman's fingers trembled ever so slightly as she secured the blanket around the child. It was a flicker of vulnerability that mirrored the turmoil he felt within himself, an unspoken acknowledgement that echoed with the weight of their shared solitude. He wanted to reach out, to reassure her, yet something held him back. The fear of opening the door to his heart was greater than the fear of being alone. He caught the soft light from the setting sun dancing in her eyes, and for a fleeting moment he glimpsed a life beyond despair, a life filled with laughter, connection, and a warmth that had once been so familiar. "Where did you come from?" Jacob finally found his voice, the question spilling forth before he could contain it. It felt clumsy, raw. The words hung in the air, as if echoing through the hollowness of his heart. The woman met his gaze, and for a brief moment he thought he saw shadows pass across her face, glimmers of a past she bore, memories that weighed heavily upon her shoulders. But she offered no answer, her silence a reflection of his own unspoken fears. Instead, she shifted her weight, her grip on the child tightening, as if both were a fragile vessel containing the promises of a new dawn. The tension lingered, charged with an uncertainty that felt almost tangible, crackling like static in the air. Jacob shifted his stance, hands clenched into fists at his sides, feeling the battle within him waging fierce and unrelenting. He was a man of action, of labor, but here in this moment he was paralyzed by the enormity of the choices before him. Did he dare to dismantle the walls he had so carefully built? Could he risk allowing another soul into the fragile sanctuary he had forged from years of heartache? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cabin, the air grew cooler, wrapping around them like a blanket. Jacob felt the boundaries of their isolation begin to blur, the silence between them a canvas where hope and fear intertwined. He took a step forward, allowing the weight of his uncertainty to settle in the space between them, waiting for her to respond. A heartbeat in the resonant silence, a delicate thread connecting two disparate lives against the backdrop of the vast, lonely plains. The air hung heavy between Jacob and the woman, thick with an unspoken understanding as they regarded one another, two lives intertwined momentarily by fate. The baby, nestled within the worn fabric of the blanket, offered a fragile tether that pulled Jacob closer, even as the weight of his own solitude pressed against him. He felt the urge to reach out, to bridge the distance that felt insurmountable. But the memories of heartache held him back, roots of isolation that ran deep beneath the surface. Each passing second felt like an eternity, yet Jacob stood frozen, a storm brewing within his heart while the world outside faded into the dusk. The woman shifted, her fingers gently unwrapping the blanket to reveal the child's face, a small, cherubic visage framed by downy hair. The sight struck Jacob with the force of a summer thunderstorm, flooding his chest with a warmth he had long thought extinguished. The baby cooed softly, a sound that echoed through the cabin like a ray of sunlight piercing the clouds of his desolation. Jacob's breath caught, an involuntary response that drew him forward, and for a fleeting moment all that he had suppressed, the longing for connection, the desire to nurture, surfaced and filled the void within. He began, but the words faltered as he glanced back at the woman, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, vulnerability dancing just beneath the surface. In that instant, he saw beyond the veil of hardship she wore like armor. He saw the fragility of a spirit that had endured, and it mirrored something deep within his own soul. Her strength, resonated with him, a haunting reminder of the laughter that had once filled his home. He took a tentative step closer, compelled by an unseen force, as if the gravity of their shared solitude pulled him into her orbit. The silence between them thickened, mingling with the faint cooing of the child. Jacob felt a crack in the armor he had built around his heart, and as he watched the woman cradle her baby, he found himself yearning to offer solace. Without thinking, he extended his hand toward her, trembling slightly, as if the mere act of reaching out would dismantle the barriers he had erected. But she paused, her eyes widening with surprise, and in that moment, Jacob felt the whole weight of his existence hang in the balance. His heart aching for connection, yet bound by fear. But then, the woman took a cautious step closer, the distance between them slowly shrinking as she began to trust the warmth of his presence. Jacob's pulse quickened at the sight of her approaching him, and the small bundle in her arms stirred, seeking the comfort of its mother. The woman's expression softened, a flicker of gratitude mingling with the hesitance that still lingered in the air. In that communion of unspoken emotions, Jacob sensed the burgeoning vulnerability between them, a shared recognition of their struggles and the uncharted territory they now faced together. "I won't hurt you," he finally managed to whisper, the words escaping like a prayer, a promise woven into the fabric of the moment. The woman met his gaze, searching for sincerity, and he could see the glimmer of hope flicker in her eyes, a fragile flame awakening amidst the shadows that surrounded them. As their worlds collided, his history of isolation and her whispered burdens, they stood on the cusp of something profound. A connection born not only from the child nestled in her arms, but from the healing power of shared scars, of broken dreams slowly mending in the light of possibility. The weight of the past still clung to them, yet in that shared glance, Jacob felt the first tender shoots of understanding push through the dry earth of his heart, whispering of the promise that lay ahead. The silence in the cabin thickened, each passing moment stretching into eternity as Jacob stood before the woman, heart racing, anticipation mingling with trepidation. The baby's soft cooing continued to fill the air, a delicate reminder of the fragility of life persisting within the harsh contours of the Wyoming plains. The shadows seemed to dance in the dim light, lengthening as twilight deepened, and Jacob felt the weight of his own uncertainty settle heavily on his shoulders. Yet in this suspended moment, he sensed something shifting, a current of unspoken understanding that transcended the boundaries of their shared solitude. As if responding to an invisible pulse, the woman stepped closer, her eyes locked onto Jacob's, searching for a lifeline in the depths of his gaze. The remnants of her vulnerability mingled with an emerging resolve, and in that instant, she shifted the small bundle in her arms, revealing the baby fully for the first time. Beneath the blanket, the child's eyes shimmered with a brilliance that seemed to reflect the fading light of day, a remarkable contrast to the dust-clad desolation surrounding them. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. In that simple act of unveiling, the woman forged a connection that felt both monumental and delicate, binding their fates with threads of shared humanity. With deliberate slowness, she extended the child toward him, the gesture both profound and disarming. The baby's soft cheeks glowed against the sunset, and Jacob felt an overwhelming wave of emotion wash over him, an instinctive urge to protect, to nurture. Yet he hesitated, fear anchoring him as he grappled with his own unworthiness. How could he, a man who had long hidden in the shadows of his past, dare to embrace this tender life? His heart raced, the invisible wall he had constructed around himself cracking ever so slightly beneath the weight of her offering. The woman's gaze was unwavering, her expression a blend of gentle encouragement and quiet strength. "Please," she seemed to say without words, her plea echoing in the stillness between them, urging him to step forward, to meet her halfway. In that moment, Jacob understood that this gesture was not merely about the child. It was a bridge across the chasm of their isolation, a profound risk she was willing to take in the hope of finding solace. Clenching his fists at his sides, he felt the enormity of her trust wrapping around them like a fragile tether, coaxing him to step beyond the confines of his solitude. Finally, with a determined breath, he stepped closer. The air between them shimmered with anticipation, tinged with the faintest promise of healing. He reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed against the soft fabric of the blanket, and in that single, deliberate touch, a rush of warmth flooded through him. As he cradled the child in his arms, he was struck by the overwhelming weight of responsibility, mingled with an unexpected rush of hope, the kind he thought had long been extinguished. The baby looked up at him, wide-eyed and innocent, as if recognizing the longing that had been buried deep within Jacob's heart. The woman watched, a quiet smile gracing her lips, her breath steadying as she witnessed the fragile bond forming in that shared silence. In the soft glow of the cabin, surrounded by shadows that had once felt so suffocating, a flicker of light emerged, a testament to the transformative power of vulnerability. They stood together, two weary souls connected by the heartbeat of a child, united in their shared yearning for a life beyond the solitude that had defined them for far too long. As twilight enveloped the world outside, Jacob felt the thawing ice within him begin to melt, each heartbeat echoing with a promise of renewal. In the embrace of the child, he realized that their pasts need not dictate their futures. The deep scars of isolation could give way to something new and beautiful, if only they dared to trust in one another. The woman, standing by his side, was not just a harbinger of change. She was a quiet reminder that within the shadows of their existence lay the potential for connection, healing, and perhaps the rekindling of hope itself. The weight of the child in his arms felt both foreign and oddly familiar, stirring echoes from a past Jacob had spent years trying to bury. As he held the fragile form swaddled snugly in the blanket, he was rushed back to the summer of 1881, the last time laughter rang through the walls of his home, a time before the tragedy that had stolen the light from his life. Memories flooded him unbidden, his wife's laughter mingling with the joyous cries of their own baby, the sun spilling golden warmth over a landscape brimming with promise. But those days had turned to ashes the night everything fell apart. The sound of gunfire had shattered the tranquility they had fought so hard to cultivate, splintering his world into pieces too sharp to grasp. He'd lost them both that night, his wife, his child, and the dreams of a family crafted with love. It was a loss so profound that silence had become his only companion, a constant reminder of what could never be again. The light in his life had extinguished, leaving behind a darkness so deep that he feared it would consume him whole. Now, as the baby stirred within his arms, Jacob felt the tender weight of life that both frightened and comforted him. The child's wide eyes, so curious and innocent, mirrored a promise that he had long given up on, a future filled with laughter, if only he dared to embrace it. Yet, those memories clawed at the edges of his mind, shadows whispering doubts that gnawed at his heart. He had locked away the hope of fatherhood, fortified the walls around his heart, but the child's soft coos were a siren call, beckoning him to confront his deepest fears. While he struggled with the turmoil of past trauma, he noticed the woman watching him closely, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. With her knowing gaze, she bore the weight of shared pain, the kind that seemed to link them across the vast chasm of their solitude. He felt connected not just by circumstance, but by the silent scars etched on each of their souls. Her determination to protect, his desire to heal, and the baby swaddled in the arms of both sorrow and potential. As the cabin settled into the embrace of twilight, the silence spoke volumes, a fragile agreement lingering between them, the weight of their pasts resting heavily over the moments they now shared. Jacob sensed the walls around his heart begin to crack, the tight grip of grief loosening just enough to let a flicker of warmth seep in. He shifted his weight, the baby nestled closer against him, and for the first time in years he felt the oppressive heaviness of solitude begin to lift, revealing a glimmer of hope shimmering beneath the rubble of his despair. With a deep breath, he met the woman's gaze, willing her to see the turbulent storm of emotions roiling within him. This shared moment felt like the first dawning light after a long, bitter night. The shadows of his past might never fully dissipate, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could navigate through them with her by his side. It was a leap into the unknown, a step toward healing he had long denied himself. As the evening deepened around them, Jacob knew that just like the baby nestled in his arms, they all deserved a chance at renewal, a chance to embrace life once more. The cabin sat cloaked in the dim light of dusk, shadows stretching across the wooden floor as Jacob cradled the baby in his arms, feeling the warmth seep into his very being. The woman observed him closely, her gaze flickering between the child and his uncertain face. The fragile connection they had forged teetered on a precipice, each heartbeat thickening the air with unspoken tension. Jacob's heart raced, a powerful mix of hope and fear twisting in his chest. The weight of responsibility felt like a stone tied to his feet, threatening to pull him under. But as he gazed into the baby's bright eyes, a flicker of recognition sparked in Jacob's memory. He recalled the laughter of children that had once filled the homestead. The joy wrapped in innocence had been stripped from his life, yet in this moment he sensed the possibility of its return. He wanted to reach out, to reclaim that lost joy, but doubt lingered like a fog, clouding the beauty of the moment. The memories of loss clawed at him, reminding him of the fragility of life he once held so dear. With every second that passed, he felt the delicate balance shifting, like the earth beneath him was beginning to tremble. A storm brewing on the horizon. "Is it safe?" The woman's voice, quiet yet firm, shattered the silence that enveloped them like a shroud. Her question hung heavily in the air, and it struck Jacob like a bolt of lightning, igniting a tempest of emotions that he had buried deeply. He felt the warmth of the baby's body, solid and real in his arms, contrasting sharply with the doubts she had introduced. Memories of danger seeped into his mind, the gunfire that had stolen everything. The hard-won walls of his sanctuary crumbled, and for a fleeting moment he felt exposed under her scrutiny. "Safe?" he echoed, his voice a low growl that startled even him. "What do you mean?" The accusation in his tone echoed louder than he intended, the tendrils of his past rising to the surface, a reminder that trust needed to be earned, not given freely. He glanced down at the child, whose innocent face was overshadowed by the shadow of doubt that had fallen between them. This land has been empty for years. There's nothing out here for anyone. Jacob sensed the weight of her gaze digging into him, and with each passing heartbeat, the chasm between them deepened, a growing rift forged from misunderstandings that pulsed with unspoken fears. The woman pressed her lips into a thin line, and the atmosphere thickened with her response. Beneath the surface, tension coiled tighter, and Jacob felt the sting of his own defensiveness rise. The baby shifted, a small whimper escaping its lips, a reminder of their shared vulnerability. Her expression softened. In that moment, he saw her determination flicker like a candle fighting against the wind. She was not only a stranger, but a woman who had borne the weight of her own sorrows, a mirror reflecting his own unhealed wounds. I can't go back," she whispered, her voice barely breaking through the air heavy with tension. Jacob met her gaze, and in that shared silence, he understood. It was not just the baby she sought refuge for, but herself as well. Her desperate attempt to survive against the odds mirrored his struggle to reclaim a life once filled with promise and laughter. The realization hit him like a freight train. They both stood on the precipice of hope, teetering on the edge of potential connection with one another, yet shackled by the chains of their past. Jacob's heart twisted painfully. "I don't want to lose anyone again," he admitted, his voice breaking like a branch underfoot. The intimacy of his confession hung in the air like a fragile thread, begging to be woven into the fabric of their shared existence. He felt the weight of his solitude pressing against him, the barriers he had fought to uphold trembling beneath the fierce winds of vulnerability. In the baby's wide eyes, he saw a flicker of the shared humanity that had been absent from his life for far too long. In that moment, amidst the uncertainty, a glimmer of understanding blossomed, a chance to embrace their new reality together, if only they could weather the storm of their pasts. The twilight had deepened into a cloak of indigo, wrapping the cabin in shadows that felt both protective and suffocating. Jacob and the woman stood suspended in a moment of tentative hope, the fragile thread of connection forged through unspoken understanding, stretching taut between them. Yet as the evening air settled, a sudden tension prickled at the back of Jacob's neck, a disturbance in the silence that surrounded them, like the prelude to a storm. In the distance, the low rumble of thunder echoed off the mountains, an ominous growl that resonated within him. Jacob turned to the open door, the chill of the evening creeping in as he stepped back, instinctively positioning himself between the woman and the threshold. An inexplicable urgency replaced the warmth of newfound connection, and he scanned the horizon, senses sharpened. With each passing second, a palpable weight settled over the land, as if the very earth understood the brewing danger that lurked beyond their sanctuary. And then he heard it, a distant chorus of hooves pounding against parched ground, a sound that sent a jolt of adrenaline surging through his veins. Jacob's heart raced as he strained to listen, the echo bouncing off the walls of his mind, pulling him back to the darker memories of a life painted in blood and betrayal. He locked eyes with the woman, fear flickering across her features as she grasped her child closer, instinctively seeking protection. They were two battered souls, united in uncertainty, and Jacob felt the weight of his responsibility grow heavier. The baby's small head rested against him, blissfully naive to the impending storm. "Stay inside," he whispered, the command barely escaping his lips. He moved toward the door, the resolve within him hardening against the pounding in his chest. The last thing he wanted was to draw her into the chaos of his past, the ghosts that had haunted him for years. The echoes of gunfire rang through his ears, memories rushing back unfiltered, filling the edges of his vision with the ghosts of tragedy. But he could not let fear rule him now, not again. As he stepped outside, the air crackled with tension. A group of riders emerged from the haze of dusk, silhouetted against the dying light, their presence an impending reckoning. Jacob's heart sank. They were both a refuge and a pariah in this land, a man marked by grief and a woman seeking solace. How long before the turbulent forces of the outside world would shatter their fragile sanctuary? He pressed his back against the cabin wall, positioning himself, prepared to confront whatever turmoil awaited. His hands clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms, tethering him to the reality of the moment. The riders approached, their laughter ringing out like a cruel echo against the oppressive stillness. Jacob could see the glint of metal, the flicker of gun belts that reminded him all too well of the consequences of allowing anyone too close. He cast a glance back at the woman, whose eyes widened in dread, and in that silent exchange, Jacob felt the weight of her reliance on him, a flickering flame of hope that clashed against the storm brewing outside. It was not only his life at stake now, it was hers, and the fragile life that lay swaddled against his chest. They were bound together now, not just by circumstance, but by the very real threat that loomed over them as the riders drew nearer, a force that could either unite them or tear them apart. The thundering approach of the riders reverberated through the air, sending a tremor of unpredictability vibrating in the pit of Jacob's stomach. He stood poised at the threshold of his worn cabin, his heart hammering in time with the encroaching hoofbeats, each pulse a reminder of the life he had fought to preserve. The woman beside him remained still, her wide eyes reflecting a kaleidoscope of fear and determination. Together, they were locked in a moment of silent loyalty. bound by the unspoken covenant of protecting the fragile life cradled between them. Jacob instinctively shifted his position, angling his body toward the door, creating a subconscious barrier between the chaos outside and the sanctuary of their home. The air was thick with tension, vibrating softly like the stillness before a downpour, and he could sense the woman's breath quickening beside him. The child nestled against his chest stirred, a gentle reminder of their shared vulnerability amidst the gathering storm. He felt the warmth radiating from the baby, a living embodiment of hope that fiercely contrasted the chill of impending danger, one that threatened to shatter the fragile equilibrium they had just begun to nurture. The riders emerged from the dusk, their silhouettes sharpening against the fading light, their laughter ringing out with a jarring contrast to the stillness that enveloped the landscape. Jacob caught a glimpse of their scowls and the glint of metal reflecting the last rays of the sun. An instinctual surge of protectiveness surged through him, mingled with a whisper of dread for the woman and child by his side. They were a beacon of the life he had nearly forsaken, yet now they stood on the precipice of another battle, a battle he was unwilling to fight alone. In that moment, the woman shifted subtly closer, her shoulder brushing against his, a silent affirmation grounding him in their shared resolve. For a fleeting moment, Jacob felt a rush of gratitude for her presence. The weight of his solitude momentarily lifted. He glanced sideways, taking in her determined gaze, and he saw the remnants of her own journey etched in the lines of her face. It echoed his own, a testament to loss woven into every expression and every trembling breath. They were two battered souls standing defiantly against the world, standing against the specters of their pasts, fortified by a fragile yet fierce bond. As the riders slowed their approach, laughter dissipated into the cool evening air, replaced by a palpable tension that hung thick and heavy like the dust in the setting sun. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, anticipation coursing through him like wildfire. He turned his attention back to the horizon, muscles coiling as if preparing for an unseen threat. Yet, amidst the rising tide of fear, he felt the presence of the woman beside him, a steady hand in a storm. In that charged silence, they stood together, united in purpose. One heartbeat, one breath, anchoring each other against the world that threatened to encroach upon their sanctuary. The tension sharpened, and a deep instinct told Jacob that any moment could erupt into chaos. But standing there, shoulder to shoulder with the woman who had walked into his life and turned solitude into possibility, he realized that he was willing to face whatever lay ahead, together. The past had haunted him long enough, and he understood, if only through her quiet strength, that it was time to confront the remnants of that grief. He breathed deeply, feeling the presence of the baby nestled against him, grounding him in a way he had forgotten possible. Within that shared space, they forged an unbreakable bond, one formed through resilience and a longing for connection, silent but immeasurable. The riders, having perceived the unmistakable bond between Jacob and the woman, drew closer, curiosity mingling with menace. Jacob stood firmly, a tactile resolve settling over him as he steeled himself for the confrontation, no longer merely a man marked by isolation, but a protector, a father in spirit. In that darkening twilight, as shadows flickered across the cabin walls, Jacob knew that they stood together, an unwavering trio against whatever challenges awaited beyond the threshold. The air thrummed with potential, and as the first rider approached, Jacob tightened his grip on the baby, ready to defend the fragile sanctuary that had begun to breathe life once more. The riders reined in their horses just beyond the porch, their silhouettes sharp against the twilight sky, a living embodiment of chaos standing against the fragile sanctuary Jacob had fought so tirelessly to protect. A brief moment of silence stretched between them, thick with tension, each heartbeat echoing in Jacob's ears as his grip tightened on the child nestled against him. The baby, unaware of the danger, cooed softly, its innocent sound mingling with the distant thunder rumbling on the horizon, a harbinger of the storm that mirrored the tumult within. "Step aside, cowboy," one of the riders barked, his voice rough like gravel, cutting through the silence like a knife. Jacob remained rooted in place, muscles tense and poised like a coiled spring. His heart raced, lingering between the instinct to protect and the fear of provoking the tempest brewing before him. He could feel the woman's presence beside him, steady and resolute, an anchor tethering him to this moment. She shifted slightly, her body brushing against his, a silent reminder that they faced this threat together. The warmth of that acknowledgement ignited a flicker of courage within him, pushing back the shadows of doubt that threatened to engulf him. As the first rider dismounted, the dust swirling around him like ghosts of the past, Jacob's mind raced back to the summer of 1881, when laughter had filled these very fields, before the gunfire, before the loss. The memory felt like a distant echo, a life he had once lived, now fading beneath the weight of grief and isolation. Deep down, a primal instinct clawed at him, urging him to remember that the walls he had built were meant to shield him from more than just physical danger. They were a fortress against the pain embedded in his very soul, a pain he had masked with silence for far too long. Yet here, in the presence of the woman and the child, the urge to open those walls surged again, battling against the fears that kept him contained. The rider approached, eyes glinting with a mixture of curiosity and menace as he surveyed the homestead. "I don't recall this land being claimed," he declared, his gaze narrowing, searching for signs of weakness. Jacob felt the weight of that scrutiny like a freight train barreling toward him, and as he held the child closer, a defiance swelled within him, fueled by the bond they had forged in the haze of shared solitude. "It ain't yours either," Jacob shot back, his voice steady, though the uncertainty quivered beneath the surface, threatening to break free. For a fleeting moment, the rider's expression shifted, the tension in his shoulders relaxing ever so slightly, as if weighing the potential of this encounter. Jacob knew he needed to withstand the storm. He'd already lost too much, and the shadows of his past clung to him, whispering of betrayal and grief that felt all too familiar. But he also understood, deep within, that this moment held the potential for redemption. For him, for the woman, and for the child, who represented a fragile promise of the future. The air around them vibrated, charged with a potent mixture of fear and hope, each heartbeat resonating through the thickening silence. And then, in a sudden shift, the rider's gaze flickered to the woman, a calculated glint igniting in his eyes, and Jacob's stomach dropped. Instinct blared like an alarm, urging him to protect her. He felt the pull of responsibility surge, a rush of emotion that broke free from the confines he had built around his heart. The weight of isolation began to peel away as he stepped forward, no longer just a man haunted by his past, but a defender of what mattered most. In that pivotal moment, the child's soft coo broke through the tension, and Jacob grasped at the flicker of hope. The reminder that within hardship lay the possibility for change, that together they could face whatever darkness awaited them. The rider's attention shifted back to Jacob, a predator sizing up its prey. As the weight of silence deepened, Jacob felt the air grow heavy, thick with unsaid threats that swirled around them like the autumn leaves caught in a gust. The child, nestled against his chest, stirred again, a soft sigh escaping its small lips, and in that moment time felt suspended. Jacob's grip tightened, both on the baby and on the fragile sliver of resolve that had begun to redefine his existence. Each heartbeat resounded with the urgency to protect, to shield the woman beside him and the innocent life he held from the storm that threatened to consume them. The rider stepped forward, dark eyes narrowed in challenge. "Last chance to step away, cowboy," he spat, his voice laced with the bitterness of disowned authority. The words struck Jacob like a whip crack, reverberating through him as the memories of loss surged forth, swirling like the dust around their feet. He could feel the woman's presence beside him, the quiet strength radiating from her like the protective embrace of a mother hen. She stood resolute, determination woven into the fabric of her being, and Jacob sensed her trust, the belief that together they could face whatever lay ahead. It was a tether that anchored him, and in that moment, standing side by side, the weight of isolation began to lift ever so slightly. "Leave us be," Jacob managed, his voice a low growl as he found the courage to step into the fray. The words hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting them all in this moment of confrontation. Jacob felt the throbbing pulse of his heart, echoing with the realization that this was no longer just about the land. It was a standoff of ideals. He stood firm, muscles tense, drawn back to the memories of the land he had lost, and with every fiber of his being, he willed the ghosts of the past to silence themselves, to allow him this small moment of defiance. For a brief heartbeat, the rider's expression faltered, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as he absorbed Jacob's resolve. The tension crackled like lightning, the air heavy with anticipation. But then, laughter erupted from the throats of the other riders, a scornful chorus that shattered the moment's gravity, drawing the rider back into the fold of bravado. "You think you can stand against us? This land belongs to no one," he taunted, the words thickening the air between them, igniting the embers of fear that lay buried deep within Jacob's heart. The threat loomed larger now, and doubt seeped into the corners of his mind, amplifying the fear for the baby cradled in his arms and the woman who had entrusted him with her fragile hope. Jacob felt the weight of her gaze, a soft plea that grounded him in the present. It was as if she whispered silently that together they could forge a way through the tempest. The baby cooed again, unbothered by the turmoil, a stark reminder of innocence amid chaos, and it fueled Jacob's determination. He stepped slightly backward, inviting the woman to take shelter to the side. The act was instinctual, a protector's move honed by years of isolation, but in that moment it solidified their bond, a promise etched into the quiet surface of their shared vulnerability. The outside world, with all its harshness, could not touch them with hope held close. Yet the rider would not back down. "You're gonna regret getting in our way," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt, and in a fraction of a second he reached for his gun. Jacob felt the world slow, the dangers blossoming into focus as adrenaline ignited his instincts. The rider drew his weapon, and in that instant a primal urgency surged within Jacob, blurring the line between past and present. He had been a man torn by grief for far too long, bound by fear that had kept him shackled in solitude. But now, anchored by the weight of responsibility, he felt the ghost of a man who once longed for connection rise within him, a man willing to risk it all for the sake of those who mattered. And in that defining moment, Jacob moved with a newfound ferocity, a guardian awakening from years of slumber, the vision of a life forged by love flickering in his mind. The darkness that had once consumed him tilted toward the light, and with the sound of the baby's soft breaths and the woman's unwavering presence buoying him, Jacob stepped forward, ready to face the storm that dared to test their bond. The flicker of hope surged, igniting the remnants of his heart, warrior, father, protector, and as he braced himself against the approaching tempest, he understood that this battle was not merely for existence, but for the promise of a future entwined, where laughter could once more fill the empty spaces of the plains. Jacob moved with a clarity he hadn't felt in years, every pulse of adrenaline sharpening his senses as the rider's gun drew nearer. The moment hung taut and electric, like a bowstring pulled back, ready to release. With the weight of the child pressing against him, Jacob felt an unyielding resolve welling up inside. This was not just about self-preservation, but an affirmation of life itself, of hope reigniting within the quiet recesses of his heart. The laughter of children echoed faintly in his mind, a bittersweet reminder of everything he had lost, but also of everything he could still protect. As the rider raised his weapon, Jacob's feet moved without conscious thought. Years of isolation melted into a singular purpose. He stepped forward, his body a shield between the woman and the threat that loomed, and in that action, the air shifted. The distant rumble of thunder grumbled overhead, a natural drum roll heralding the storm they had anticipated since the moment the woman first appeared on the horizon. He could feel her presence anchoring him, stitching together the frayed edges of his resolve, and in that instant, he understood the depths of what had awakened inside him, the instinct to defend those who could not fend for themselves. Time folded in on itself, and Jacob's heartbeat blurred with the rhythm of the approaching danger. With a swift, decisive movement, he lunged forward, intercepting the rider's aim. The gun discharged in a deafening crack, a roar echoing across the plains that seemed to shake the very earth beneath him. Jacob felt an instinctive surge of fear, but fury propelled him, an ancient fire ignited by the primal desire to protect. A whirlwind of dust enveloped them, swirling around as if the land itself were rising to their defense. And in that maelstrom, he found an unexpected sense of purpose. In the chaos, he felt the warmth of the baby against his chest, a precious weight that reminded him of everything worth fighting for. The child's quiet coo was a haunting melody, grounding him amidst the storm. His hands trembling, Jacob pushed through the adrenaline, refusing to let the past dictate his actions any longer. The weight of grief fell from his shoulders as he faced the rider, who stared back in disbelief, the gun still poised, but wavering ever so slightly in Jacob's sight. This moment became a crucible, and in it, Jacob felt that he was the smith, a man willing to reshape the very nature of his existence. The other riders shifted uneasily, sensing the change in the air as the storm clouds loomed above, the tension rippling across the space between them. Jacob instinctively stepped closer to the woman, their bodies nearly touching, a silent shield forged by shared vulnerability. The rider's bravado faltered, confronted now by the unwavering determination radiating from this unlikely duo. The echoes of laughter that had once filled his home rang louder in his heart, whispering of a future not yet written. With one firm breath, Jacob locked eyes with the rider, an unspoken challenge coursing through the air. This was their land, their moment, and nothing would tear them apart again. The gun hung heavy in the rider's hand, uncertainty creeping in as the weight of his choice settled. And in that split second, Jacob understood the very essence of survival. It was not merely about avoiding loss, but embracing the risks that came with love. The child nestled against him stirred, and as the evening light began to fade away, Jacob felt hope ignite within the depths of his being, lighting a path toward a future filled with laughter, connection, and the love that transcended even the deepest sorrows. The sound of the gunshot reverberated through the stillness of the gathering dusk, momentarily freezing the tension in the air like a photograph. Jacob stood at the threshold of his cabin, heart racing in sync with the fading echoes of the blast that had shattered the silence. The rider's expression had shifted, disbelief replaced by something akin to caution, as if Jacob's resolve had carved a new path in a landscape once ruled by threat. The dust swirled around them, momentarily obscuring the riders, and in that fleeting moment, Jacob felt a flicker of possibility open within him, like petals unfurling in the soft morning light. The woman stood close beside him, her presence a steadying force, the warmth of her shoulder brushing against his in a silent pact of solidarity. She met his gaze, and in her eyes he found an unspoken promise, a hope that resonated with the very fabric of their shared experience. The baby nestled against his chest, oblivious to the turmoil surrounding them, cooed again, the sound breaking through the tension like a balm soothing old wounds. Jacob's grip tightened around the child, feeling the steady heartbeat against his own, a rhythm that spoke of life and resilience and a future yet unformed. With a deep, trembling breath, Jacob stepped forward, breaking the barrier of fear and uncertainty that had held him captive for too long. The riders hesitated, their laughter dying in their throats as they took stock of the defiance standing before them. A man, a woman, and a child, bound together against the encroaching darkness. The air between them crackled with the energy of uncharted potential. It was a moment stripped of pretense, raw and authentic, echoing the heart of the plains around them. Jacob could feel the weight of the past still clinging to him, but it began to dissolve in the light of this new connection, the possibility of a life that could rise from the ashes of isolation. "Leave this place," Jacob called out, his voice steadying with each word, a declaration resonating with the strength he had drawn from the woman beside him. His gaze swept over the riders, defiant and unyielding. The storm clouds roiling above seemed to mirror his resolve, dark and turbulent, but not without the hint of rain, the promise of renewal. He felt the embers of hope flicker in the depths of his soul, igniting the courage to protect what he had come to hold dear. The child's tiny fingers curled around his shirt, anchoring him in that moment, reminding him that the weight of the world need not rest solely on his shoulders. For a heartbeat, the riders exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. And then, as if sensing the shifting tide, the leader kneed his horse forward, a toothy grin creeping back onto his face. "You think you can stand against us? You're outnumbered." The challenge hung thick in the air, but Jacob felt the woman beside him draw in a breath, the slight shift of her weight, a gentle reminder of the bond they had forged. They were not alone. They faced this uncertainty together, a force that could not be easily dismissed, but Jacob's heart swelled with a fierce determination. "You're right," he replied, his voice ringing clear against the backdrop of the brewing storm. "But you underestimate what it means to have something worth fighting for." He stepped closer to the porch, clenching the child protectively to his chest. "I will not let fear dictate the life of this family." In that moment, the air shifted again, and the rider's bravado faltered, his grip on the reins loosening ever so slightly as the realization settled in. The child's soft coos filled the silence, an innocent reminder of the life that flourished beneath the shadows of despair. As the first drops of rain began to patter against the parched earth, the riders exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping back into their expressions. Jacob felt the tension in the air shift, the potential for a new beginning swirling like the dust around them. The woman leaned slightly into him, their bodies nearly touching, and he could feel the warmth radiating from her, a silent assurance amid the chaos. The world outside might still be shrouded in uncertainty, but here in their sanctuary they stood united. Together they could cultivate a future filled with the laughter and love that had long eluded them, a bright flame kindling in the heart of their shared isolation.